Yields back before going to the gentleman from California. The gentlelady from Texas has a unanimous consent, I think. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit records from the Department of Justice reflecting meetings with the U.S. Attorney John Durham. These records were in response to American Oversight's request for DOJ communications between the offices of the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General and the Durham or his first assistant. I ask unanimous consent to place this in the record of this hearing.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent.
Gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, you and your colleagues have continually cited to Steve DeUnio's transcribed interviews using selected statements taken out of context. I move for unanimous consent to enter the entire transcript into the record so the American public can see for itself exactly what he said.
Yeah, we will work on that. Yeah, we'll work on that. We don't want to. We'll talk with the chairman. We want to make that fully available.
Mr. Chairman, you're objecting to a unanimous consent request then to something?
Mr. Chairman, I object.
Okay.
So, if I understand correctly, Mr. Chairman, you're happy to cite selected portions of the transcript out of context, but you're not happy to see.
Mr. Chairman, there's an objection. Is there further action?
You don't want the American public to see this, Mr. Issa?
Roll call vote, please.
Yeah.
There's no vote on that.
I just want to clarify for the gentleman. We want to put the transcript out. There's a couple. We got a little work to do on certain names that have to be redacted for obvious reasons. But yeah, we definitely want to put the transcript out. We'll work with the minority to make sure that happens. I thought it was an amazing interview by Mr. D'Antuono, the former head of the Washington Field Office. We want that information out to the public, and we'll make sure it happens.
Can I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that you grant the request subject to redactions to protect personally private information?
So, without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much.
Gentleman from California is
and you have accepted my submission. I didn't hear
that right away.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Durham, many of
today's hearing on collusion in the Global Alliance for Responsible Media. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama to lead us all in the Pledge of Allegiance. Chair is now recognized for an opening statement. Section 1 of the Sherman Act makes anti-competitive restraints of trade illegal. This includes coordinated actions that harm consumers by limiting the choices available to Americans. That is exactly what the World Federation of Advertisers, the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, and every company that is a member of these organizations has done over the last 5 years. They came together, agreed to limit advertising on certain platforms and news outlets that millions of Americans choose to read, watch, and listen to. And how do they do this? WFA members represent roughly 90% of the global advertising spend. That means WFA has almost complete monopoly power over advertising dollars and a tremendous amount of market power. GARM, which is an initiative of the WFA, includes in its membership over 100 of the world's biggest brands, ad tech providers, and advertising agencies. GARM has representatives from each of the 6 major advertising agency holding companies. GARM's steer team, which acts as a board of directors for the organization and approves nearly every action by the alliance, includes Unilever and other massive consumer goods companies, as well as Group M, the world's largest media buying agency. They collude to make sure that no other advertisers support any news outlets, platforms, or creators that these massive companies don't agree with. And these people do not like conservatives. Again, don't take my word for it. Here's what employees at Group M said to GARM's leader about Fox News, The Daily Wire, and Breitbart News. Employees from Group M said, quote, they hated their ideology. That employee was discussing how to pull advertising from these news outlets. And unfortunately, it's not just Group M. Unilever encouraged Facebook to label one of President Trump's political ads as misinformation during the 2020 election, which would have caused that ad to be removed from Facebook. GARM organized a boycott of Twitter when Mr. Musk bought the platform and bragged about cutting Twitter, and then they bragged about cutting Twitter's revenue by 80%. Unilever wrote to GARM's leader that the company had, quote, issues with overtly partisan takes by Elon Musk. The example Unilever gave was Elon Musk's handling of the Hunter Biden laptop story. Unilever had a problem with Elon Musk releasing internal Twitter documents to journalists and exposing how and why Twitter incorrectly suppressed the story about the Biden's family influence peddling. It's the Twitter files. Garmin and its members threaten platforms that don't comply, and the best example is Spotify's Joe Rogan's comments on Spotify when Joe Rogan's comments about the COVID-19 vaccine. To be clear, any of these companies could, on their own, legally refuse to advertise on a certain platform or news outlet or with a certain content creator. Unilateral decisions are not illegal. But if they choose to pull advertising from the Daily Wire or other similar outlets, they will not be reaching millions of Americans who choose to consume that content, but their competitors will. In other words, no single company can unilaterally pull its advertising dollars off a platform or news outlet over a long period of time because that company's competitors will advertise and reach the audience. It's called the market. Ørsted, a Danish renewable energy company, explained it perfectly when its employees wrote an email to GARM asking when the Twitter boycott will end. Ørsted told GARM that Twitter, quote, is an important platform for us to reach our audience, so we would like to consider going back. But they looked to GARM for direction, and they were asking GARM for permission. And frankly, that's exactly how cartels operate. They collude against conservatives and other outlets, platforms, and content creators. In fact, they come right out and say it. GARM's leader wrote that the issue with the advertising industry and digital platforms is the, quote, extreme global interpretation of the U.S. Constitution. He also complained taking U.S. norms and applying them globally is something that's a concern, and said there's a problem with Americans' 230-year-old Constitution. If the WFA and GARM are allowed to continue, if these massive companies can collude without consequences, the results will be devastating. If this cartel continues to target conservative outlets, content creators with different voices and viewpoints, and any person that does not recite the so-called mainstream media talking points, there'll be real problems. They will deprive these good journalists and content creators of the funding they need to succeed. They will use their cartel to eliminate competition based on internal biases of these massive companies, and they will deprive Americans of the content that they actually want to consume. With that, I would yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, once again, we hear an effort to reinvent January 6th, this time as people expressing peacefully their disagreements with the government. January 6th was not a peaceful expression of differences with the government. It was a massive, violent attack on the Capitol with the object of overturning a free and fair election. Mr. Jordan cut off debate on my amendment to hold him in contempt, so we couldn't discuss what his role was, why he was subpoenaed, and whether he should be held to the same standard as a private citizen. And while he said quite erroneously that he was not required to testify, either because he took issue with the object of the investigation or because the speech and debate clause, as Representative Lofgren pointed out, that does not apply to subpoenaing a member of this body. Let's remember who did step forward, and let's ask ourselves not why he was compelled and refused, but why he didn't volunteer to come forward, why he was unwilling to share his information, why it was even necessary to subpoena him. After all, so many others did their constitutional duty. Republican Speaker in Arizona, Rusty Bowers, talked about how he was compelled by his oath, by his faith, by the Constitution, to do his constitutional duty, to refuse the former president's entreaties to overturn the election. And he showed his devotion to our country and the Constitution by coming and testifying. Jim Jordan would not. Brad Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia, did his constitutional duty both to protect the vote in Georgia, to ignore the former president's demands that he find 11,780 votes that didn't exist, but also to come and testify, to share with the country what he knew, but not Jim Jordan. Cassidy Hutchinson, a staff member at the White House, showed extraordinary courage to come forward, showed her devotion to her country and Constitution, and came forward and testified, but not Jim Jordan. Capitol Police officers who were beaten and gouged that day, they came forward and testified, but not Jim Jordan. White House counsel, Republican White House counsel, came forward and testified, but not Jim Jordan. Unless we forget why the committee wanted Jim Jordan, let's look at our referral to the Ethics Committee over his failure to come forward for guide as to why we wanted his testimony. Representative Jordan was a significant player in President Trump's efforts, we wrote. He participated in numerous post-election meetings in which senior White House officials, Rudy Giuliani and others, discussed strategies for challenging the election. Chief among them claims that the election had been tainted by fraud. On January 2nd, 2021, Representative Jordan led a conference call in which he, President Trump, and other members of Congress discussed strategies for delaying the January 6th joint session. During that call, the group also discussed issuing social media posts encouraging President Trump's supporters to march to the Capitol on January 6th. An hour and a half later, President Trump and Representative Jordan spoke by phone for 18 minutes. Yes, we wanted him to come testify about what he discussed with President Trump for 18 minutes. And no, Jim Jordan has never told this body why he was unwilling to tell the country about that conversation in the run-up to a violent attack on the U.S. Capitol. Or why he spoke with White House staff about, as we wrote, the prospect of presidential pardons for members of Congress. He was unwilling to say why he thought pardons for members of Congress might be necessary. And today, he's unwilling to tell us why there should be a different standard for a member of Congress who is subpoenaed than for a private citizen, and why the standard for a private citizen should be so much higher. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle say that's not a germane question. We love to hide behind germaneness when we really don't want to answer the root of the matter. And the root of the matter is, why is Hunter Biden's failure to appear worthy of a criminal contempt, but the chairman of the Judiciary Committee's unwillingness to comply with a congressional subpoena gets nothing more than a shrug? That's really the question before this committee today. And so far, there is no answer. I yield back.